Finally, no more long extension cords in the garden. We have a couple of barbecues and a homemade pizza oven at the end of our garden. Whenever we've needed electricity out there, I've had to run some extension cords. That's also true in winter when I put up the Christmas lights. The total distance from this place to where I get the power from, which is the garage, is about 85 or 90 feet. It's the blue building way back there. I'm not telling you how to do yours, but I'm telling you how I did mine. And make sure you get the right permissions and permits and follow all the codes that you do for electrical work or any other codes that you do for building. And by all means, make sure you do the call before you dig service, which in our area is free and a pretty good idea because I knew I was going to be going over some existing power lines. Conceptually, it's a pretty easy job. Dig a trench, put some conduit in it, run the cable, hook everything up, test it, and backfill. And of course, you want to start with some good site prep. Make sure that you're not going to be going through any major tree roots. Make sure you're not going to be going over any existing power lines or cutting through them. All the stuff you would do to make sure you don't make a huge mistake. In my case, everything went pretty much according to plan, but I'll share some learnings with you at the end of this video. I do have a trenching bucket, but first I used the regular bucket to just clean up the site a little bit. I had to take away some trees, flatten the area, and just get it ready for the long trench I had to dig. The regular bucket on the BX23S is also useful for digging near the building where I need the extra space. The wire and conduit coming out of the building are no longer in use, so I'm not really worried about chewing them up at the moment. I'll remove them later. With the hole near the building mostly done, it was time to switch to the trenching bucket. According to the code in our area, the minimum depth is 24 inches. If for some reason you can't dig it that deep because of an obstacle, you need to take steps to protect the conduit and the cable. The substrate I was digging through varied from aggregate close to the building to untouched soil as I got further out into the garden, and there were some roots I had to be careful of, and the small ones I just cut through. One of the things I should have done was take the thumb off the tractor arm. I think that would have made the digging go a lot easier. I'm still fairly new at this tractoring business, but one of the fun things was to walk the tractor forward using the backhoe to just push it. It took some coordination, but I finally got the hang of it. That meant I didn't have to get off the tractor, spin the seat around, drive it forward, spin the seat back, and continue digging. It's a real time saver. In some areas where I couldn't reach with the tractor, or it was just too difficult because of roots or some other obstacle, it was easier to dig by hand, and I used one of those post hole diggers because it got me deep enough and I was able to remove the soil pretty easily. But it was pretty hard work. With the trenching mostly done, it was time to turn my attention to the conduit and the wiring. I had bought some Schedule 40 PVC conduit, and I also bought a GFCI or ground fault circuit interrupter for the breaker. Rather than put a GFCI socket at the end of the line, I thought putting a breaker in would protect the whole line, especially if I decided to extend it later on. For that length of run, I got a pretty beefy cable as well. I got a 10 gauge NMWU cable, which is rated for underground wet areas. To fish the cable through the conduit, I fashioned a small plug a little bit smaller than the inside diameter of the conduit. To the end of that, I inserted a little hook. I then fastened some really strong nylon twine to the back of the hook and inserted the plug on one end of the conduit. I then walked the 90 feet to the other end of the conduit and connected a shop vac to the end. This sucked the plug all the way up through the conduit, pulling the string behind it. It only took a few seconds, but now I could use the string to pull the cable back through the conduit. While it's not really necessary, I did put some wire lubricant at the entrance of the conduit, and that made getting the wire through a little bit easier. It certainly helps to have two people do this, One can pull on the string, and the other can push the wire in. I found it easier to feed the curved pieces and the shorter runs over the cable one by one. Then it was a matter of just cleaning off the conduit and gluing it together with the appropriate cement. With the majority of the run finished, I laid the conduit at the bottom of the trench I had dug. I had to push it past some of the roots, but no big deal. With the majority of the conduit glued, it was time to install the riser that took the cable into the garage and to the breaker panel. Then it was time to prepare the box for the socket at the other end and get the wire ready for connection. With everything closed up, it was time to use a tester to make sure that all the connections were the right way. This one also has a little button that you press to test the GFCI, and it worked fine. I tested everything a few more times to make sure it was working fine, and then I started filling the hole where the conduit was. I partially filled it just level with the top of the conduit. While it wasn't technically necessary for this depth of trench, I covered the conduit with a pressure-treated 2x4 for extra protection. I did this for the entire length of the trench. I then covered the 2x4s with some barricade tape I got from Amazon. This is to warn people in future if they start digging that there's some electrical lines below. With everything completed, it was time to backfill the trench. I think the job turned out pretty well. I'll wait for it to rain a little bit, and I did tamp some of it down, but I'm sure the ground will settle and I'll have to fill a bit more. Overall, it turned out really, really well. So, here's what I learned. Even though I have a tractor, there was a whole ton of manual labor involved. Don't underestimate it. Number 2, I'm older, fatter, and more out of shape than I thought I was, and this job really highlighted that. And number 3, sometimes your significant other won't let you into the house until you hose yourself off. But hey, that's a chance to wash the tractor too, so all good in the end. Thanks for watching. See you next time.